Online business is really changing. I have been in this industry for over 10 years and never have I seen some of the shifts that I'm seeing at the moment. In this particular episode, I want to talk about the changes that I'm seeing in terms of attention, how to get it, how to keep it, and how to use it to actually sell things. Now, we are all business owners. We are all strapped for time, and we need to prioritize where to put our time to get the best bang for our buck. Some of the things that we might have focused on before, I am going to invite you in this episode to perhaps think about attacking a different way. So, if you are a busy online business owner that is perhaps experiencing a drop of engagement, not having as many people paying attention, not finding attention as easy as it used to be maybe to come across, and you're looking for a way to get the best bang for your buck when it comes to where to put your time and how to actually have it pay off, this is going to be a gold for you. I'm going to essentially be sharing some of the things that I have been experiencing from my own experience with the channels and the attention platforms that I use within my own business. So, traditionally, the main ways that I have gotten attention, which is top of funnel, how you actually get people to find out about you in my business, have been Instagram. So I have been on Instagram since back in 2017, and it has always been a huge traffic driver for me. Number two, my podcast. Now, it's arguable whether that is top of funnel in terms of whether it gets attention or whether it nurtures people. I'm going to talk about that more. But it has traditionally been a marketing channel that I have used in my business, and email. So they have been the three key pillars that I have focused on. Now, in terms of the amount of time that each of those things take, I actually think that Instagram has always been the biggest time suck for me. I will spend, honestly, almost a day sometimes creating like 3 or 4 Instagram posts. A podcast I'm generally pretty au fait with now, so I would generally spend like 2 to 3 hours maximum, absolute maximum. Like I think today's podcast episode will be maybe 30, 40 minutes, and I haven't done any prep beforehand. So it just depends on the type of content I'm creating. And then I have an assistant that helps with the other bits and pieces. And then in terms of email, generally it's just been repurposed content, or it has been content that I have created at some stage or another, and it's now sitting inside of an automated funnel. So in terms of the time investment that I have put into things, it has absolutely been social media being the most time intensive, followed by the podcast, followed by email, which really is upfront work and not too much so far moving forward. So I have recently gone through and I have audited the effectiveness of each of those channels inside of my business. And interestingly, the amount of time that I spend on each of those channels does not correlate to the impact that each of those channels have had for me. So I look at impact from 2 perspectives. Well, really, it's 3 perspectives when you think about the full marketing funnel. Number 1 is, how do people actually come across me in the first place? Number 2 is, how do people come to know, like, and trust me? And then number 3, how do people actually buy from me? Now, if I was to start with the last one first, I track really well what I call last click attribution. I don't call it that. The marketing world does. It's a jargony word for what was the last touch point that somebody had before they came and they purchased from you. Now, for me, that last click attribution has pretty much always been email and also, interestingly, Instagram. So Instagram has been a channel that people are kind of seeing my content inside of launches, or they opt into one of my funnels and they're going through and purchasing from there, which I actually didn't expect. I now know, and I have known for a while that is the case, but it's not something that I would typically expect. So that's quite interesting. And email, which is something that I absolutely do expect, because, you send out an email and there is a link in the email and they can click on that email and they can purchase something. So those are the 2 channels that have always been the most powerful from a last click attribution perspective. Far and away from a nurture perspective, in terms of what has worked best for me for warming people up, it is the podcast, far and away. So something inside of my own business that I have identified as time has gone on, I have done really well, is earn trust. So I'm really good at long form content. I have been really consistent with this podcast for, coming up to 7 or 8 years now. And I would say in terms of like my strength in each of those three areas, I would say it is that middle of funnel, that nurturing, that trust building. And far and away, it has been the podcast. And I know this because people say, I've been listening to your podcast for a certain amount of time. And that's what, led me to ultimately buy, that warms people up. And then in terms of that top of funnel, I do feel like this has always been a little bit of my weakness. It is something that I haven't really needed to focus on in previous business models because it has been more of a less of a high volume business model, more of a high ticket business model, and therefore it just hasn't been as important to get so many leads. Now, I totally shifted business models about 12 or 18 months ago, and so it is a much lower ticket business model. Now I have a flagship course that I sell called Lifestyle Business School, which you may know if you listen to the podcast. And it is a mid to low-ish ticket product, depending on your definition of what the price points are there. But really the way that I have kind of gotten around the fact that I haven't really had a top of funnel channel is that I have typically been running ads. So that is the ecosystem of what the business has looked like in terms of traffic and content. Now, like I said, online business is very much changing at the moment. And I personally have identified 3 big shifts, which you could call challenges. I actually consider them opportunities, especially with the mindset that I have in business at the moment where everything feels fresh, new, and exciting. I talked about some of my life changes and where I'm at in my business in the last episode, if you want to go back and check that out. But with that kind of renewed energy, I actually want to bring a fresh energy to everything I'm doing at the moment. So the fact that some things aren't working like they always have kind of feels like a bit of a fresh opportunity and something that I'm excited to dig into a little bit more. So I want to share what those 3 things are. I definitely don't think that I'm an island here from the conversations that I have had with students, from the conversations that I've had behind closed DM doors with other friends on the internet. I think everyone is experiencing this to a greater or a lesser extent. And I think for the people that honestly, for the first time ever, are willing to do things fresh and different, not just listen to the tired old advice, not just listen to the way things have always been done, because people are savvy to the way that things have always been done now, and it almost makes you invisible if you're doing things that way. I think that there is a lot of opportunity. So let's dig into what those 3 things are. So number 1 is social engagement. So social engagement for me, let me know if it is the same for you, but for me has declined a little. Now, when people used to say that, people have said that since the dawn of time, right? My social engagement has gone down, the algorithms aren't working anymore. And look, I have always kind of eye rolled a little bit because I'm like, at the end of the day, it is about the quality of your content. And I do think that that is still a big factor here. But I will say that the type of content that has typically worked on Instagram, or the types of things that used to get a certain amount of reach and engagement, that is really shifting at the moment. And so what looks like for me, for example, let's say that I was coming up to a launch. One of the things that I have always typically done is created a suite of Instagram content that is nurturing and starting to prime people inside of a pre-launch period. I think that the amount of effort and time that is going into that at the moment may not be as worth it as it used to be if the same amount of people aren't actually seeing that content anymore. And that is absolutely the case in my own experience. And so one thing that I have been really looking at in terms of the way that I create Instagram content and what I am doing is a couple of things. Number 1 is getting away from creating content that I feel is something that ultimately AI could spit out. And so that is that how-to content. So how to do XYZ. You can just Google that stuff now. You can put it into ChatGPT and really shifting the focus to like how I uh, am making X dollars on my evergreen funnel, how I am doing XYZ, like that unique perspective. And I was playing about 6 months ago with like little lead magnets that were very much so like how I conducted my launch, how I did XYZ, and they went gangbusters. And honestly, it's because that is the sort of content that I would be interested in as well. Like, I know how to do a launch, I know how to do all of this sort of stuff, but I'm always interested in how other people are approaching something, or what is working or what isn't working for somebody else. And so, two things there. I think really shifting the focus in terms of social media content, but all content, really away from anything that just has to do with like tips and tutorials, but instead sharing from your personal perspective. And I think that this can be made even more powerful at the moment by being open to experimentation. And I don't think that that is a hard thing to do right now, because I think that we're all experimenting a little bit. And so like being open to be the person that is kind of going first and is willing to share what happens, whether it's a smash hit or whether it is something that is a learning. I think that the people that are going first and that are open to like vulnerably, I hate that word because I think there is a section of the internet where vulnerability is kind of capitalized in a negative way, but sharing in just a really real way the results of the things that you're doing. And I don't think that like something not working out 100% is going to be something that people are like, oh, like that is, I'm not going to work with that person. I actually think like the fact that you go through and you're willing to be the leader and you're willing to experiment is something that is going to, number one, get you attention, but it is going to help to establish you as a leader inside of your space, because you are the person that is willing to go first. So the other thing that's kind of related to that is thinking about your content through the lens of whether it's something that you would engage with and actually be interested in. I think that sometimes we go through and like we come up with these content ideas, or we create this content because it's something that we think that we should create. And sometimes we just get into these like, complete mind blanks where you're like, oh, what am I going to create? What am I going to talk about? And so we just come out with something and we're kind of like, oh, it's fine. But fine doesn't really cut it. And I think like one thing for me that I'm really thinking about is like, what would I actually really love to see? Like would I love this piece of content? Would I be like, oh my gosh, I want to engage with that? Would that be something that I would enjoy seeing? And so it's almost like flipping the script and being like, okay, when I'm scrolling through Instagram or when I'm looking on social media, what is it that actually kind of stands out? And what is the content that I do actually really enjoy? So in a really practical sense, one thing that you could do, and one thing that I have done recently, is kind of think about not the people in your niche. Let me be really clear on that, because you just end up, even if you don't intentionally mean to do it, you just end up starting to kind of get into the ecosystem and, creating very similar content to them. But thinking about people that are kind of like in a complementary space and the type of content that they're creating. So for me, like I love personal finance and I love and follow a lot of personal finance creators. And so I love looking at the type of content that they're creating and then thinking about, okay, from an online business perspective, what is it about this particular piece of content that I really enjoyed or that kind of like stopped me in my scroll? And then how can I take that and add it to one of the pillars that, I focus on inside of my business? And so in a really practical way, I use ClickUp as my project management system. So it's literally having a list of like, what are all of those creators, listing them all down, having their little Instagram accounts there. And then when you're sitting down to actually create content, either throughout the week, just like drop in ideas as they come in, or just open up their Instagram accounts and be like, okay, so what is it that's really hitting for those people? Or what are the things that I really identified with? And then what is the hook, or like, what is the flavor of that you can kind of take and use in your niche or your space to kind of have a practical way of being able to create content that you would actually like if you opened up your phone and you saw it sitting there. So from an Instagram perspective, specifically as well, I think that anyone that is like a millennial Instagrammer or anyone that's kind of like been on Instagram for as long as I have, would have a certain way of doing stories. We kind of like put a story up every now and then, and it's kind of like documenting your day, or it's a little bit sporadic, and it used to get a little bit of reach. I just find that it just doesn't now. Like, honestly, it's really not even worth putting that sort of stuff up. One thing that is working for me when it comes to stories is literally just having one slide go up and either having like a whole heap of value on that one slide, with like a call to action to DM a ManyChat word, because that engagement really seems to ramp things up. Or just being clear on like what that one slide, or if it's not one slide, a series of slide that is all posted at the exact same time, that has engagement prompts the whole way through it. Posting that, but like not posting it throughout different elements of the day. And then being really clear on like, what is the purpose of actually posting this story? So for me, like one of the things that I really think with Instagram at the moment is, I think that the days are numbered where social media is going to be a channel that we can even get people off. And I think that anyone that kind of like started inside of this space, like, a few years ago, remembers the days where you could like, get people to go and read your blog, or like to go and do all of these things. And I just think it's just the days of that happening are really numbered. But I do think that we're in this magical time at the moment where it's still kind of possible. And so I personally am thinking about, okay, so, on a Monday, maybe it's like, how do I get people over to my Substack or whatever my long form content channel is, so that you can start to move people a little bit off Instagram because they're not seeing a lot of the stuff anyway, and get them over. And so I think using those stories, like either just one story with a link or a ManyChat DM comment word, is working really well for me at the moment, or a little series just with a really clear, like, okay, so what's the point here? Like, am I getting people over to my YouTube? Like, what does that look like? So social engagement is down. That is how I am tackling it. Oh, one thing I should also mention as well is, I think it's non-negotiable. I teach this in my traffic playbook course, but the fact that people aren't seeing content at the moment, and we're spending all of this time creating it. Like I said, I spend more time creating Instagram content than anything else, just because it takes time. I think that we need to be putting money, and what I mean is like remarketing budget, behind our best performing content. And so what that can look like is an always on strategy, where you just have like 10 of your best performing posts that are just constantly going out and getting seen by people that are still in your warm audiences. So like maybe they're on your email list, or they've gone to your website, or whatever it is. Or if not, whatever your best performing post is from like the week before, adding that into like a little remarketing pool and having that just going out to people, especially when it's coming up to like campaigns or launches and things, because otherwise you're putting all of this effort into social content and it's not being seen to the same extent that it used to be before. Now, one thing that has always been true, but I think that with the declining social engagement is becoming even more true, is that we need to, and this feels like stale advice, and so just know that it's actually not. I do have a fresh perspective on it. But you know how people are always like, oh, you need to get people off your social media accounts and you need to get them onto your email list. Now, I just want to show you in like a very real way inside of my business why this is important. So I've got about like 18,000 Instagram followers, and I've got about 20,000 email subscribers. And so where it is at the moment in terms of like my average reach, I maybe have like 1,000 or 2,000 people see my posts on Instagram. So if I was to divide, say, 2,000 by 20,000, then that's coming in at 10%. So if I was to divide 2,000 by 20,000, that's coming in at about 10%. So like maybe 10% of my people on a good day are seeing my Instagram content. Now, my open rate in email is around that like 50 to 60% mark. And so like just the sheer number of people that are seeing that, like if it's 50%, that's 10,000 people are seeing those emails as opposed to 2,000 on Instagram. So this kind of brings me to my second point. Point number one was that social media engagement is on the decline, in my experience. And I do think that this is something that is starting to happen, and it's not just the quality of content anymore, But number two, I think that there needs to be a shift in this thinking that email is like the secondary platform. And what do I mean by that? Well, the traditional advice on the internet has always been, create a lead magnet and then get people onto your email list, or like get people off social media and get them onto your email list. But there hasn't ever been that much of a conversation about what happens once they are on said email list. And I think that we have all gotten a little bit lax about this concept of like you then need to nurture your email list with regular emails. I definitely have. So up until now, currently, I have an email that goes out on Tuesdays that basically just shares my podcast, which is now also on YouTube. So there is a link to listen to the podcast and a link to listen to the YouTube. And it's just a very stock standard. It has an intro, it has a summary of the episode, and then it has the links. And then on a Friday is like a link roundup, which is, just a summary of like the content that I have created. Now, do I think that that's inherently bad? No, but what I do think is that it is a little bit stale. Now, I recommend really closely monitoring your unsubscribes. Now, the way that I very practically do this is that I have a little automation set up inside of my email service provider that every time somebody unsubscribes, it just sends a little Slack ding to me. So it just kind of gives me a pulse. And I have this for subscribes as well. It gives me a pulse of like how many people are subscribing and how many people are unsubscribing. And really making it your goal to make your email list content so good that people really look forward to opening it and actually want to stay on the list. And this is going to be a big focus for me. So how am I practically going about doing that? One of the big things is getting away from this concept of sending out a email that feels like it's just come from a company, or it just feels like it's like very boring and is just sharing the podcast episode, right? I think that what is working at the moment is people feeling like they're getting something that's, not the polished version of things. They feel like they're connecting with you as a human. They feel like they're getting a little sneak peek into what's going on behind the curtains. And there's that real element of connection. So like crafting your emails like as if you were writing it to one of your best friends and using, whether that's your tone of voice or not, but I just mean the type of feeling that somebody gets. They're like, oh, okay, this is interesting. Now, there's someone that I follow online and I have let this person into my primary inbox because their emails are so good. So I have a burner email address that I use to pretty much subscribe to everything so that my main email doesn't get cluttered. And so when I first signed up for this person's emails, I just used that address. But the way that this person wrote, the information that I was getting from them and how personalized and behind the scenes it actually felt, I've gone back in and I've subscribed from my primary email because I actually look forward to it and I want it to appear in my emails. When I was going through and looking at the unsubscribes that came in after I sent out my weekly podcast email, the reasons were coming in as like, my email inbox is too cluttered. I don't need this anymore. It's not adding value, and like a certain amount of unsubscribes is normal, but that just says to me that like this isn't a piece of content that somebody wants in their primary inbox. And if I was to reflect on my time, all of this time that I'm spending on Instagram content and then my email is kind of an afterthought, the focus for me is very much flipping the script on that. Now, another focus in terms of making that a reality is to not just have people come onto your email list with a lead magnet, but to actually want to be on your email list by virtue of the fact that you have an interesting email list. So I have a newsletter. You can subscribe to it at lifestylebusiness.school/newsletter if you want to see the flavor of it. That is value in and of itself. So it starts with a 14-day sequence that is really valuable lessons to actually engineer a lifestyle business. And then from there, it goes into a weekly email. And so the real rise of newsletters, I think, over the last couple of years is something that I think we should get on board with if we haven't yet, because I think that there is a lot of opportunity. Again, I talk about this in my traffic playbook course and I give you the exact kind of strategy that I have used to implement this. But if you can get someone onto your email list because they actually want your emails and not just because you've tricked them by some sort of lead magnet and then you're just suddenly firing off emails at them, I think that's really valuable and something to consider focusing on. So that is number 2, actually flipping the script on where the focus is and really actually, even though you've been told to do it forever, actually focusing heavily on your email list, giving them things that other people don't get, talking about it, like having a dedicated newsletter that like you would actually look forward to opening and making that as much of a focus as it really should be, given the impact that it has in your business. So with those stats, for example, for me, 2,000 people are seeing this content that I'm pouring so much time into on Instagram, but at least 10,000 people are seeing it on my email list. Like, what should I be doing here? I should be focusing on the email list. And the third thing I want to talk about is podcasting. So I came into podcasting about 7 or 8 years ago when it wasn't everyone having a podcast, right? It was actually quite rare for someone to have a podcast. And at that time, I think that it was very much a top of funnel and middle of funnel activity, meaning you could get attention and you could get people to find out about you. And then also you could nurture people. I don't think for 99% of people that podcasting is really top of funnel anymore, unless you want to be like Stephen Bartlett or someone that is like creating a big media company. I don't think that that opportunity exists anymore. That doesn't mean that podcasting isn't incredibly powerful. Like I said, for me, there's no way I would ever stop this podcast because it is the reason that people end up coming and buying from me. I also know with experts that I follow, like if I come across someone and I'm thinking of purchasing from them, I always check first if they have a podcast and I go on this binge. I just binge all of their episodes to see if like, is this person for me? And that is so powerful. And something that I think, honestly, if you're an expert or like you're in the thought leader space, or you're creating like education or you're a service provider, anything along those lines, I just think a podcast is so powerful. But here is where I think that things have changed. If you just want it for that middle of funnel, that is absolutely fine. But if you want to make the most of the opportunity of podcasting, I think that the focus, and you can choose here, but the focus for what long form content you create first actually needs to change. So I wouldn't anymore, unless you want this to be middle of funnel and you just want to have a chat with people and you want to update and you're just all in on your podcast being middle of funnel, in which case that is fine. Just make sure that you absolutely pepper it everywhere within your ecosystem to get people who find out about you elsewhere to come over. But if you really want to maximize the opportunity of podcasting at the moment and still have it as your middle of funnel, but then also use it as a way to attract new people, I think that the focus needs to be not on podcast first audio content, and instead to either choose writing or video as the like seed of where you're creating your content. If it's writing, I think that Substack is an incredible opportunity at the moment. I'm going to likely create a separate episode about Substack and talk about it a little bit more. But essentially, Substack is a social media platform. It has discoverability baked in, but it's where you create long form written content that then gets emailed out to people. So is it the same as your email list? No, I'm not treating it that way. I will talk about the nuance there another time. But it is a way that you can essentially own your audience, but then also get discovered via the platform. I think there's quite a bit of opportunity there at the moment. And just like podcasting, there probably won't be forever. But I think that if you have a podcast or if you want to have a podcast and you want to maximize top of funnel, if you could have, and you're strong with writing and that sounds like something that you want to do, have Substack as the primary platform, write out, a long form piece of content and then create a podcast from it. So you're still getting that middle of funnel opportunity, but then you're also getting that top of funnel. Now, if writing does not sound like your jam, then I recommend using video and YouTube in particular as the seed content, and then also having that appear on the podcast. Now, that changes the way that the actual content looks and feels. So, on YouTube, you really need to start with a strong hook if you are going to capture attention with a piece of content. Whereas, if you're only creating an audio content piece, then you might start with, hey, here's how, life's been going, blah, blah, blah. There's nothing wrong with that if you just want your podcast as middle of funnel. But I do think that you can really accentuate and amplify the effort that you're putting into creating podcast episodes if you start to not think of it as an audio first, but choose either Substack or YouTube as the seed content and then having that go over to your podcasting channel. The truth is that a podcast just isn't going to grow on its own otherwise. And like I said, that's fine if you just want people to, have a little binge of you before they purchase from you. But if you're in this situation, I know quite a few people that have been like, oh, it's on my goals list to grow my podcast. And I'm just like, I think we're past the point that you're going to grow a podcast unless you want to just go all in and create a Stephen Bartlett Diary of a CEO style podcast and become a media company. I think that Substack or YouTube being the seed content and then putting it over onto the podcast is, number one, going to help you to use that content to attract new people, but also it is actually going to be the thing that grows your podcast because those are two discoverability channels, whereas podcasting isn't so much. Yes, podcasting has SEO baked in. Yes, people have said to me quite a few times that they found me by searching inside of the podcast app. But gosh, that happens so much more on YouTube. And with the notes feature on Substack and the discoverability and social media elements baked in there, it's just happening so much more. So there you have it. From the perspective of someone that is in the trenches with you, online business is changing. I think that attention is getting more difficult to get if you're just doing the same thing that you did before. But I think that there is a lot of opportunity if you are willing to switch things up a little bit and kind of play to the era that we're in at the moment. So just to summarize what we have been through, I think that social engagement is something that isn't as frothy as, maybe it was a few years ago. And there is huge opportunity there to kind of amplify what you are doing, changing the way that you are kind of dealing with shifting your Instagram stories strategy to actually get reach and eyeballs on your stories, thinking about whether the content is content that you would actually want to create. And especially when you're coming into sales campaigns, making sure that you have a little bit of money behind your best performing content so that people in your warm audience that aren't otherwise going to see it anymore actually do still see that content. Number two, going email first and actually doing it, really looking at the numbers and thinking about, okay, so where is my energy currently going at the moment? And if I actually started nurturing my email list and the fact that 50% of people are opening those emails, what sort of impact could that have on, how much people are seeing my things? And therefore that's going to have a flow-on effect all the way through your sales funnels. And number three, if you have a podcast or you want to have a podcast, starting to think of it a different way. It's no longer, this really easy opportunity to get new eyeballs, but I do think it is still such a powerful middle of funnel platform. But if you want that discoverability and you want that top of funnel magic, as well as the ability to nurture people with it, I do think that making either YouTube or Substack that seed content and then pushing that over to the podcast is the way to go at the moment. So that is it for me this week. Hopefully that was helpful for you. Please let me know. Send me a comment. I'm now posting these over on YouTube. I'm just getting into the habit of doing it. I'll zhuzh them up and make them a little bit prettier as time goes on. So come and subscribe and leave a comment over there. I've got 34 subscribers at the moment, so we can see if I have any more by the time this goes live. But I'll definitely see it if you comment there. I got my first comment the other day and it felt really special. I'm also over on Substack, so I'll leave the link for my Substack in there if you want to check it out and just see what is happening over there, because I have talked about it a few times now. And you can come and leave me a little DM on Instagram. I always love hearing from you. It is at @StevieDillon_. All right, guys, if you want more of this, like how I did something content, definitely subscribe because there is going to be more of it coming your way. And if you have something that you would like me to create content on, if you're wondering how I did XYZ, I'm really open to sharing it at the moment. So let me know, drop into my DMs. All right, guys, until next week, bye.